Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Listen, I'm glad to have you guys here. Now, here's what I wanted to talk about. We are in a lot of trouble. Go over to Shadow Stats with John Williams. His site, I think he's listing the inflation rate in the United States right now, the actual inflation rate around 9%. But they're saying it's like 1.5% or something like that for the Fed. And the thing is inflation is picking up, but it's not regular inflation. What we're actually having is stagflation, something called stagflation. Now, there is a precedent for all of this. If we go back to the Paul Volcker era, if we have a time machine and we go back to when he was chairman of the Fed, we had a similar situation. Let's get the chart started right here, and let's take a look. Going back to the time of Paul Volcker. Paul Volcker, chairman of the Federal Reserve from 1979 till 1987. 1980, the Volcker shock raised the Fed funds rate to its highest point in history to end double-digit inflation. So they had increasing amounts of inflation back in that time frame, in around the early 80s. The United States underwent a tremendous amount of inflation. It was double digits, more than 10% the inflation. They're listed. That's their admission of how high the inflation was. It was really probably like 20%, and it was stagflation. Now, here's why we're in trouble. The tariffs that are going in place right now. China, the tariffs that are going in place with Mexico, and so on, are going to start the inflation ball rolling. It's almost like a snowball rolling down a hill. Once it gets momentum behind it, it starts rolling faster and faster. That's the way with inflation. And the world's central banks, the Federal Reserve being the central bank of the United States, it's very hard for them to control inflation. But they do have tools by which they can control inflation. And Paul Volcker used one of those tools. So he was faced with the highest inflation point in history, double-digit inflation, and what happened was he increased the federal funds rate. It says Volcker fought the 10% annual inflation rates with a contradictory monetary policy. He courageously doubled the Fed funds rate from 10.25% to 20% in March 1980. Okay, so they were starting out with that stagflation that came around 1980. They were starting out with a federal funds rate of 10.25%. We consider 5% now normalized, or 6%. We consider that normalized federal funds rate. But back then, their normal rate was double of what we consider normal. We've barely got off of the floor right now. We're like 2 point something percent. That's not a normal federal funds rate. This would be more normal. A 10.25% federal funds rate would be more normal back then. So you got a bit of room to work with there. You can lower rates down from 10.25% to whatever, and you got room to work with. Right now, we've barely got the federal funds rate off of the zero mark. Barely. They just barely got it up. And you see what it's caused, the problems that it's caused. Basically, it's like this. Say you had somebody who could, say a woman, when she's 20 years old, she could do skip rope. Okay? Well, that's what the federal funds rate was like when it was at 10.25%. Could do skip rope. So, say she was really good at doing skip rope. So, well, say 20 years went by, and say she ate a lot of pasta, a lot of spaghetti, she ate a lot of high, rich foods and everything, and slowly as the years went by, she gained a lot of weight. Or say he, the same thing. Say he could skip rope, But say he gained a lot of weight over the years. And say after about 20 years went by, he gained 150 or 200 pounds. So then he decided to go out and try skipping rope again. You know, so the kid's got the rope going and everything. You know, a couple kids on either side, and the rope's going. He's ready to skip rope, and he goes to jump that skip rope, and he can't get his ankles up high enough to get over the rope. It's just, it won't work anymore. And that's the way with us now. Back then, we had a federal funds rate of 10.25%. But now it's bloated. We've got a bloated federal funds rate. It's way down, just 2-point-something%. We don't have enough room to play with. Now, what they did back then was they raised the federal funds rate up to 20%. Can you imagine a 20% federal funds rate? 20%? We can't even get it past 3% now, at this point. So that's like we can't even get it off of the ground. We can't get it off of the ground high enough for the rope to pass under it. Under the ankles, you know? The rope has to pass under you. You have to jump high enough to be able to get that rope underneath your ankles. Otherwise, it just ain't going to work. And that's where we're at right now. It ain't going to work. Because we can't get that federal funds rate up. We can't even get it up to 5%, 3%, 4%. You know? So what are we going to fight inflation with? It says here, he courageously doubled the Fed's funds rate from 10.25, can you imagine 10.25%, to 20% in March 1980. He briefly lowered it in June when inflation returned. Volcker raised the rate back to 20% in December and kept it above 16% until May 1981. That extreme and prolonged interest rate rise was called the Volcker shock. It did end inflation. Unfortunately, it also created the 1981 recession. Now, you can see how raising the federal funds rate will bring on a recession. But back then, in order to bring on a recession, they had to raise the federal funds rate to 20% before it actually started a recession. Right now, they've raised the federal funds rate, and they've got it up between 2 and 3%, and it's bringing on a recession. So they've hit the top balance of where they can take it to right now, the federal funds rate, and it's not very high. Now, how much room do they have, because this recession is coming on now? How much room do they have to play with to lower it? Not very much, just a couple percentage points. The recession hasn't even really started yet, and they're lowering the federal funds rate to try to stop the recession from coming in hard. Now, we got that happening. There's no way around it. There's not enough room now. They're going to have to go into zero interest rate policy, and they're going to have to try something that's never been tried before. This is the condition that we've got ourselves in. They're going to have to go below the zero boundary and into negative interest rate policy. Huge problems coming up. Now, I drew this illustration for you guys. And in this illustration, we see the equity markets. Okay, I drew this in paint. It's just something simple and quick I drew in paint. But we see the equity markets here. This all comes under the equity markets, securitized obligations, credit default swaps, bonds, junk bonds, exchange-traded funds, mortgage-backed securities, commercial paper, derivatives, you know, and this all comes under the credit markets and equity markets. All of this stuff is under the credit and equity markets. So, basically, the way I want you to look at it in your mind, and this is the way I look at it, is a giant blob. It's like a giant blob of nothing but paper. A giant paper blob that they keep adding to this blob. They keep making it bigger and bigger. It's like the blob in the movie. You remember the blob? The blob kept growing bigger and bigger. He kept roaming around and sucking up everything in its sight, and it kept growing bigger and bigger, the blob. That's what the credit and equity markets are like. And they basically, they cover everything. And these derivatives and securitized obligations, credit default swaps, bonds, junk bonds, exchange traded funds, everything. It's just one big giant blob of paper. You know, and there's nothing really much to it other than the dollar supports it all. It's all held together with the dollar. And it's considered to be, for investors, this is considered to be the only game in town, is this blob. They all play within the confines of the blob. Now, you have your cryptocurrencies, and you have your gold, real gold, you have your real silver. This is not part of the blob. The club, the big boys, the boys that have the real money, they always play with the blob. They put their money in and out of the blob. And this is how they make their money, is with the blob. Buying real physical gold and silver is not their bag. They might buy gold futures. They might buy SLV or GLD. But the real physical gold and silver is not their bag, man. It's just like you remember what was his name? Like James Bond, the other guy though, Austin Powers. Austin Powers is not my bag, man. It's not, you know. Anyway, this is not their bag. They're not into this. They're not into buying real physical gold and silver and taking possession of it. One of the things about it is they're scared. They're scared of it. Well, you imagine if you were a big time money manager or equities fund manager or one of these guys, you know, you're going out there and you're working with other people's money, and you're going to go out and buy gold and silver, right? Take possession of it. First off, with the kind of money you're working with, you're going to need one big-sized dump truck to hold all the gold. Gold's heavy, too. For the amount of physical gold you'd have to take possession of. And then what happens if gold goes down to $3? What happens to then? Right? They don't want to lose money. And you're also going to find that an awful lot of these fund managers and stuff, and these money managers and stuff that work on things like pensions and stuff like that, you know, they're looking for yield. They do not consider gold a yielding asset, something that's going to deliver yield. And they have to come up with like 7.5% per year yield on the money, you know. And the only way they're getting that kind of yield now is they're having to take risk. They're right in there in the junk bond market and so on, you know. In derivatives and whatever they can find, credit default swaps, whatever they can find and they can make yield. They're chasing yield. And so right now we're working with a market where this capital that they're using to try to derive yield is racing around this way and that way and every which way, trying to find yield, chasing yield, you know. Here's the thing. These guys are starting to get scared. Really, really scared right now. They're on top of the situation. They're not really talking about it too much, but they know. They know that we're heading toward a recession. And they're trying to secure their money into places within the confines of the credit market and equity market where they can find yield and also the best place to put the money. Well, right now, they've been pouring into bonds awful heavy. But you're going to find that this capital that they're moving around within the system, these guys trying to chase yield, is flying out of one thing and into another faster and faster because of the fear. And as the fear increases, they don't care. These guys don't care. And there is absolutely a possibility. I was thinking about this morning. That, like I say, it's not their bag. You know, the gold, physical gold and silver is not really their bag. If they get scared enough, they'll go after it, though. But they're going to have one heck of a high fear factor before they're really going to start to move in that direction. Once the way they are, though, once a few of them start to move in a certain direction, then the others will follow, and they all kind of rush in ahead of each other, trying to get, and basically they'll pump a market. They can pump a market. That's what they've been doing to the bond market. They've been pumping it. These bonds, this has been an incredible bull market into these bonds. They've been flooding into these bonds. They remind me of rats on the open water heading for any boat or anything so that they don't drown. That's what it's like. They're like trying to find something that they can attach themselves to, and then once they all attach to it, once they all start attaching themselves to it, then they drive the price up enormously. Now, this is what they've been doing with bonds. But here's the thing: if they get frightened enough, they're going to start looking for other. They start running out of one thing and into another thing, and then the price starts to fall on the thing they're running out of, and the capital starts actually in conditions like these, like we have right now, with all this fear within these traders. What starts to happen is capital starts to move from one thing to another really fast. You know, there's the entire possibility that even though we're going into a recession and things slow down and everything else, these capital flights and capital inflows from the credit market coming out of one thing going into another thing, we could see crashes in one thing, and we could see other things elevated that might shock and surprise you. Well, one of the things that's going to stand out to these guys, and going to start to stand out to these guys, is the incredible amount of the cryptocurrencies. If they start to move up higher and become a bigger market, well, there's no end to how large the cryptocurrency market, and the cryptocurrency fits into what these guys, their scheme and how they work better than the actual physical gold and silver market. These guys like to buy by just basically pushing a button, and they've just bought so much of whatever, right? That's it. That's all they do. They push a button, and they've just bought or they've just sold, you know? Whereas a physical gold and silver market, they got to actually go and they got to securitize they got to take possession of something real. They got to actually go and take possession of something real. This is like, to these guys, it's like, they can't do that. They don't understand that. It doesn't work. This is the way it used to work back, and this was the common way that it was done back 100 years ago. You went and you bought something, you went out and took possession of it. Now we're living in a world where they don't want possession of it. They want to push a button, buy something, and just see it on the computer terminal. It says, this is yours. This is what they're used to. And it fits in better with them looking for yield, constantly chasing yield. They're going to start to take a look at cryptocurrencies, which is delivering a lot of yield. These guys could all start pouring in the money, and it is a possibility. It's run through my mind. I'm starting to think about it. You know, these guys could actually start to pour into cryptocurrencies, and they'll drive the price up incredibly. Well, there's the yield they were looking for. All of a sudden, you know, you get a few of these fund managers and stuff. Well, cryptocurrencies has already taken a big bounce. If you look, it was $4,000 something. Now it's like $8,000 and something. It's like doubled. That's 100% profit, you know. You'd think that's not going to go noticed by these guys. You get a few of these guys start to pour in, right, and they see more profits come in. These guys, they're so used to working with things that are not tangible, things that are not real, that in these credit markets and in these equity markets and stuff, that their way of thinking and everything just fits in as a perfect fit. It's just like a perfect mesh for a non-tangible item that, like cryptocurrency. And it's just opening itself up as the capital's starting to flow this way and that way faster and faster. The cryptocurrencies are starting to open themselves up, and I'm starting to be more and more open to this viewpoint that this actually could happen. And once it starts to happen, the success within the cryptocurrency industry will generate its own further success. In other words, the more people that pour in, the more of these investors that start to pour in, the bigger the yields, and these guys are chasing yield, the more money then is going to pour in on top of that. Believe me, cryptocurrencies is not going unnoticed by these guys in the credit markets and equity markets. It's all a buzzword right now amongst them. You know, and they're watching it very carefully, and the reason why it went from 4,500 up to where it is now, 8,000 and something, just very well could be these guys and the first few of them actually starting to pour into the market. Where do you think all that money's coming from? I'm telling you, it's not coming from mom and pop. I know mom and pop out there may be buying a little bit of cryptocurrency for themselves, but it's small time. It's like a half a Bitcoin here, a quarter of a Bitcoin there. It doesn't add up to driving the price up from 4,500 to almost $9,000 in a matter of weeks. That's big money. That's serious money coming into this market. It could be actually the start of something much bigger, of these guys starting to actually notice and actually come into the marketplace. Listen, thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next show. Bye-bye.